Alright, today we're going to look at practice 17A and 17B, assembling a engine. And what we're going to do is start with a standard inches assembly file. So we're going to go Start, New, we're going to find our assembly, and it's going to be standard inches right here. We're going to create, and we're going to place the rblock.ipt. So we're going to go up here, you should have place. Go into our engine assembly, and we're going to RB lock. It's the rotary block. And you'll see we bring it in. Don't do anything just yet. What you're going to do is you're going to right click on the model, select rotate X90. Right click on the model, say rotate X90 again. And then we're going to ground that at the origin by right clicking and selecting origin, and then we say, once we placed one, we say OK. So we've got a nice basic grounded piece. Now what we're going to do is, you've noticed when we did that, it has a pin on it. The pin on that little folder means it's grounded at the origin. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to place the cylinder, the rcylinder.ipt, and we're going to rotate the X90 twice and place it just to the side. So we're going to go place the RB cylinder, or the R cylinder here, and I'm going to right click to flip it once, right click to flip it again, and I'm just going to place it over here, sort of how it looks in the book. And then I'm going to say OK. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go to Assemble tab, right under the Assemble tab, and I'm going to click Joint. And when you click Joint, it's showing you this kind of a dialog box. And what we can do is we can turn on and off this little guy to toggle that dialog box. So we're going to select a rigid joint, and on the R cylinder component, which is the first reference, right, you always click what you want to move first. We want to move the cylinder because this is grounded, it's our base. We want to move the edge of this lip right there, and we want to move that to the edge. Oops. And now if you have something happen, you just undo it and then do it again. That's going to happen from time to time. We go back to our rigid. We're going to click that edge to this inner edge. This is where you got to really pay attention. And we're going to move that there. Now notice that should be flipped. So what we do is we click off there, and that will flip the dimension. And then we can say OK, or checkbox in the mini toolbar. I always keep my bigger dialog box open just in case. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, notice next to our rigid, our right cylinder, when you expand the part, you get in a rigid joint. Because if you ever want to open that back up, you can always double click and we can take a look at the joint itself. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go place. We're going to place the crankshaft and the master rod. So by doing that, you're going to hold Control on your keyboard and select master rod and select the crankshaft. And you're going to say OK. Now notice both components come with the assembly. And we're going to right click and we're going to rotate X90 twice. And all that does is kind of just put them over here to the side some. We're going to just place them over here, and we're going to say OK once. We're going to go back and we're going to place the R block. Oops, actually what we're going to do is we need to first edit this assembly, so we're going to hide some of this stuff for the meantime. So if we go over to R cylinder and R block and we hold Control down and pick both of those, you can right click and you can turn off the visibility. Notice this check mark here. so we can go and just focus on this sub-assembly. Now we're going to hold down the left mouse button on the master rod component, which is this, and notice we can move it around. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and move it sort of like they show in the picture, which is sort of like and that's sort of like how they have it. And we're going to go to the Assemble tab, and we're going to click Joint. We're going to click a rotational joint. And the first thing we want to do is select on the master rod. Right, the master rod is here, and we're going to select this edge on the outer ring. Right, there's this edge here. Let's try this one. We're going to move that to the center point reference here. And what that does is that makes a rotational joint around there. Now once we've made that rotational joint, we're going to say OK. And then notice once we've done that, you get a rotational joint underneath your crankshaft and master rod. Now we could flex that to make sure, see it doesn't change. Alright. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the crankshaft in the graphics window or in the model browser, and we're going to ground that to ground the component. So let's go to the crankshaft, we're going to right click on it, and we're going to go to grounded, and what that's going to do is create a parent to this master rod. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the master rod component and make sure that it's still got some of that rotational freedom. So what we did there is we anchored this guy so that this one knows to spin around the other one, right? It creates a hierarchy between the two parts. So now let's go ahead, we're going to place an instance of the piston head pin and the piston head. So we're going to go piston head pin, piston head. I'm going to hold control and grab both of those. I'm going to place them off to the side. And I can rotate them a couple times. Say OK. Notice my pin's over here. And if I don't get them how I want to in the parts, I can take and use a quick free rotate to kind of make it look the way we want to. And then I hit escape, and then I can do a free rotate, and then we can turn this guy to be looking sort of how they want. Alright, now once we've got that, we're going to go to joint, and we're going to select a rigid joint. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the midpoint of this pin, and then we've got to place it between this cylinder that runs through here. Now this is where you got to be careful, because we want to right click in the graphics window, and we need to place the center of this between the center of those two surfaces. So we go between two faces, click that face and that face, and then we're going to say apply. And notice it applies those, slides the pin in between as I click to complete the joint. Now the next thing we're going to do is a rotational joint that's going to attach this piston head and pin to the top of this master rod. So I'm going to go to joint, I'm going to go type rotational, and I want to first select this center point of the piston pin again, right, the piston head pin, and then I'm going to connect it to the center of this surface, this object. Now notice when I moved that, it broke the reference between the two. until we say OK. Now once we say OK, you notice I get my component back in shape. Now select the piston head. We notice it's got some freedom there. It can rotate anywhere it like. Now let's go and turn back on our block, right? That block that we hid back here a long time ago. We're going to hold Control, pick both of those, turn on our visibility. Alright. Now we're going to select the crankshaft component in the model browser, right click and clear the grounded option. So where we grounded this guy, this crankshaft, we're going to unground it. So now that it can move around freely, because it's going to need to be added to the assembly. So we're going to take and we're going to click Joint, and we're going to go Cylindrical Joint this time, and we're going to select the center of this ring on the outer edge, right? So we're picking this edge of the piston ring. Wait, we could do this one. And we're going to move that to match the outer ring here. And when we do that, your piston aligns. We check mark, say it's okay. And then what we do is we just check that this piston doesn't go anywhere, right? This thing's going to break everywhere, but we'll fix that momentarily. Alright. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to click Joint and make a cylindrical joint on the crankshaft component, which is this edge here. We want this edge to meet this edge. Let's see what we get. So we create this kind of condition. And we want to say check mark. Let's see what we get. There we go. Now our piston is locked in, right? Our crankshaft is locked in. And now the next thing we're going to do, and we're going to just always, every time, we're going to drag and double check, make sure our freedoms, our degrees of freedom are appropriate, right? This thing should be rotating or doing something of the sort. And we're going to place an instance of the hub and shuttle into the assembly. So let's go place. I'm going to come back here, I'm going to pick hub and shuttle. And I'll place the hub off to the side. Let's see, the picture sort of shows it like this. And I'll say OK, and then I'll place a copy of the shuttle. And I'll rotate that a little bit to make it look like they did in the picture. Now we're going to make a rigid joint. And on the hub, on the first reference, which is this thing, the hub, we're going to select that center surface right here. We're going to move that face to match the end of our assembly here. And so what that does is creates a joint of the hub to the crankshaft. Now we say OK. And we can actually notice that now this cylindrical spin activates the piston. The next thing we're going to do is initiate the cylindrical joint connection. Joint, cylindrical. We're going to click on the shuttle right dead center on this face, and we're going to move it dead center to the hub. So that would be just like that there. Notice it just moves it along. We can say OK. And now notice this is clashing, right? Because this material is cutting into the other material, but we can still spin it, and then this can spin too. And we'll fix that momentarily when we create some additional constraints. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make a few constraints instead of joints. And in the Assemble tab, we're going to go to Constrain. And your constraint dialog box looks as such, and we're going to click Angle Constraint. And what we're going to do is remove all that rotational freedom from this shuttle component. We don't want it moving around. We want it to sit still. So we're going to go angle, and then we're going to click directed angle, and we're going to expand our hub component over here. And notice there's a work plane in here already. That work plane is what we're going to select first. And we're going to align that work plane to the origin of the YZ. And now what that does is create that angle constraint there. Let me do a quick save as. Sometimes the audio may get caught. So let's just hold this as shuttle assembly process. I'm just going to save this to the side. And then what I'll do is, let's pop back out. Alright, so picking back up where we left, before we had a little audio malfunction there, and that will happen from time to time when you run too many apps at one time, for instance the screen capturing with all of the assemblies. But what we're going to do here is we're going to create a constraint. We're going to go angle, directed, and we want to first open the hub and click work plane 1, and we want to constrain that to the shuttle's origin YZ, and then we get the same constraint, and then what we're going to do is hit accept or change that to 180, and notice how it frees up our alignment. Say OK. Now notice this will move together, right? So this pops out, but it has limits. We need to break those limits. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go into and expand the shuttle. So the shuttle has a limit to its range of motion on the hub, right? And that's based on this cylindrical connection down here. So what we're going to do is right click and we're going to edit that cylindrical connection. And then we're going to open up and edit the limits, right? The limits are up here. We want to change the limits in the linear area to start at 1.9 inches. And let's make sure our units are good here. Let's go to Tools, Document Settings. Let's double check, change our units back to inches, say OK. Go back to our assembly. Open up our cylindrical joint, and we're going to change our linear, and if it's 1.9 inches we'll make it something close to that. Let's go to edit. That's what we need to be in edit. Start. There we go. We want this to be 1.9 inches. We want it to go to end at the 4.3, so that keeps it from moving back and forth. And we'll say OK. Now what that does is it lets it move to the extents of each face there. So now we've checked that. We're going to place an instance of the Pro Blade and the prop con rod into the display, and we're almost done. I'm going to go place Pro Blade, place that. Right here, and then I'm going to place the con rod right here, say OK. And I want these to kind of rotate and move, so I'm going to go to free rotate and I'm going to move this guy so it looks a little bit like the one in the picture. Like that. And then I'll hit escape. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a joint of the fin, this face of this fin to the face there. So I'm going to go joint, make it rotational. I'm going to select this face here, and I'm going to move that face to here. And then what we'll do is we'll select joint, and we'll say OK. Now we're going to add a ball joint to the blade and the con rod. So first we go joint, change this from automatic to ball. We're going to pick this end, the center of the sphere, and place it centered on the sphere that shows up when you create the cup there. That creates a nice ball joint, and we'll say OK. And then what we can do is kind of drag this guy so it clears up a little bit. Alright, now the next thing we're going to do is add another ball joint between the shuttle and prop con rod. So we're going to go joint, not constrain, we're going to go ball joint, and we're going to go from this guy to right in here. And you want that sphere to line up. You don't want an edge, you want that sphere to line up. And what that does is line that up. And notice it's off center, so we got to cancel that. And we're going to do it again until we can figure out how to get that to be centered as a ball joint. Let's see if we can do a between two faces. It's still not the sphere. So hang on, we're going to try and keep playing with this till we get the sphere to line up. So we go ball joint. Let's keep playing with that. And even when, and I'll undo that to show you, it was working and I just didn't hit accept the whole time. So if I just go to ball joint, select here, and then I just select inside that sphere, it'll move it in what looks like a poor manner, right? Like it's falling through the object. But once you hit OK, it'll adjust all of it accordingly. And now we get the wing showing as it should. So what we'll do is we'll right click in the graphics window. What we're going to do, we're going to take these back down. We're going to select our prop blade and our con rod. We're going to right click, we're going to say copy. And then we're going to right click in the graphics window and say paste, and that brings this stuff out here, right? Still joined together. And we're going to do the same thing for the other wings. So I'm going to go joint. I'm going to go rotational. Remember, that's rotational from this face to this face. I'm going to accept that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flex this wing around till it gets kind of where we want it to line up. And I'll even move that ball joint out of the way. Then we're going to go joint, ball joint. I'm going to move the center of this one to there. Say OK. I only need all that animation. That'll let us have the wings flexing accordingly. And we can come back later and we can actually flip these orientation, but for now we'll just get these assembled. So now I'll go back, add the prop blade conrod, copy, paste. I'm just right clicking, hitting paste and copy. Move these out of the way. Let's do our joint, rotational. I'm going to move that face to that face. We're going to accept it. We're going to flex it around until it looks sort of right. We'll have to come back and flip that guy. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another ball joint from here to there. Say OK. These are kind of flipped around if you notice. And we'll take a look at those in a little while. But for now we've completed all of our basic. We can just pull this hub here. Right, it flips all around. We can spin this thing by dragging it. We can also activate the whole assembly by just pulling on the piston. And what we're going to do next is add these in a circular array all the way around. So we're going to use the joint connections to complete the rest. So the next thing we would do is we'd come in and we would add a piston and save this basic radial engine to each component. And one way we could solve this is if we wanted to just do a pattern that might work. It's a little off center. So we can copy those around as you'd like, but that's an optional challenge for you to try to copy and apply those same joint and connections. Remember, use the hints to copy paste some of that functionality between. Okay. Now the next practice we're going to do, you're going to save what you got. The next practice we're going to do will start shortly.